Fantastic. Great. Well, thank you guys so much for having me. And I want to start by playing a little game. It's a game you probably haven't played before, but I promise you'll get the hang of it very quickly. I'm going to put up two things on the screen, and I'm going to ask you which of those things is tastier. And importantly, I want you to be honest, not what you wish was tastier, not what you think should be tastier, but which of the two is actually tastier. Okay? Our first contestant is a wonderful, delicious head of broccoli. You're probably aware that broccoli has lots of vitamins and nutrients. You may be aware that broccoli has lots of fiber. It does, but that's our first contestant, wonderful, delicious broccoli. And our second contestant is a cheeseburger. Now, this is not my version of a cheeseburger. If I was going to eat a cheeseburger, it would probably have bacon on top because everything is better with bacon. But now comes the tough part. We have to vote. Which one would you say is tastier, the cheeseburger or the broccoli? Now, I know it's a very tough decision. Most of you would probably say the cheeseburger. A few of you might say the broccoli. But the point here is interesting, right? We all know that we should eat more broccoli. We all know that broccoli is the right thing to do. And yet, when push comes to shove, when it's late at night, we're tired, we're on the road, the cheeseburger beckons. And it's not random or luck how that works. It just fits better with the way our tongues and our stomachs are designed. Certain food is tastier than others. Now you're probably saying, well, what does this have to do with us? Great, food is tastier. But I'd like to port this analogy, certain food being tastier than others, to a slightly different domain, which is how tasty is our marketing. Right? We all have a similar goal. We want to get our destinations and our conferences and our events to catch on. But to do that effectively, we have to fit our marketing with the way people are designed. Not their tongues, not their stomachs, but their minds. And so in the short time we have today together, I'm going to talk about three things. First, how can we make our marketing tastier? Second, how can we use word of mouth to increase interest and attendees? And third, how can we help our events and destinations catch on? But before we do, one more question from me. Here are three products or brands that all of you are probably quite familiar with. We have Walt Disney World, a self-described place where dreams come true. We have Honey Nut Cheerios, the wonderful and delicious breakfast cereal. And last but not least, we have Scrubbing Bubbles, which for those of you who don't know, is a bathroom cleaner. Now again, if you had to guess, in this case, which of the three do you think get the most word of mouth? Is it Disney, is it Cheerios, or is it Scrubbing Bubbles? And think about it for just a second here. And the answer seems easy, right? It seems like, well, of course, it's Disney. Who would talk about Honey Nut Cheerios, or who would talk about dish soap, Scrubbing Bubbles? Why would people talk about that? But I want to point out two things from this exercise. First, this wasn't as easy as the cheeseburger and broccoli. You're probably sitting there going, I think it's Disney World, but you're not sure. And indeed, right, there's a lot of reasons why you could say, why do I care about this question? Whether it's one versus the other, it's not very important to me. But why one wins is really important, because unless we understand why some products, some services, some destinations get more word of mouth, it's going to be very hard to get more conversations for our brands, our destinations, our organizations. Which brings me to my second point. You might have guessed Disney, good guess, unfortunately wrong. The answer is actually Cheerios. Cheerios gets more word of mouth than Disney World. And what that points out is that our intuition about word of mouth might be wrong. We might be spending a lot of time and money and effort and energy in the wrong place. We have to understand the underlying science. And so that's a long-winded introduction to a title slide. But as is very nicely mentioned, I'm Professor Jonah Berger. I'm a marketing professor at the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania. And what I'll do today in sort of the 25 minutes we have together is give you a brief tour of my recent New York Times and Wall Street Journal bestseller, Contagious, Why Things Catch On. I'll talk a little about the science behind word of mouth, and more importantly, how we can use that science to get our destinations and our events to catch on and be more popular. Most importantly, everything I'll talk about today is based on rigorous academic research, not just based on opinion. I spent the last 15 years doing research in this space. We've done dozens of papers. All of them are in the back of the book. You can also find the research at jonahberger.com. We'll have a little bit of time today for questions at the end, so if you have any questions, keep those in mind. And also feel free to reach out to me at J1Berger on Twitter if you have additional questions that we don't get a chance to answer. Okay, so let's jump into the science of word of mouth. And here's a quote, and I think that quote is pretty obvious, but in case it isn't, word of mouth generates more than twice the sales of traditional advertising. And not just television ads or radio spots. I know many of you may not have the resources necessarily to do television ads or radio spots, but anything that's a piece of company-generated communication, whether it's a print ad, whether it's a brochure that we send out, whether it's a booth we have at a conference, whether it's our website, a testimonial on our website, anything that comes from a company or organization rather than another person. And indeed, some very nice research shows that $1 spent on word of mouth goes 10 times as far as a dollar spent on traditional advertising. And why is that? Well, there's sort of two key reasons. And the first is trust. And as you think about it, right, we trust our friends, we trust our colleagues, but we don't trust ads. Right? We're used to seeing ads that say, hey, this is the best product ever, or hey, we have the best service ever. You've never seen an ad that says, oh yeah, this product, not so good. Our service, it's not great. Yeah, our destination, not the most fun. Right? Everyone says our product is fantastic, our service is good, but because of that, other people don't know whether to trust us or not. Right? But their friends, their colleagues will tell it to them straight. They said, hey, I stayed at the hotel. It was really nice. Hey, I went to that town. It was a lot of fun. Hey, I went to that conference or event. It was great. Or I went and it wasn't so good. And so we can trust our friends and our colleagues much more. So the first benefit is trust. Right? We're more likely to listen to and trust the information they have to share. But the second benefit is a little more nuanced. And that's the targeting benefit of word of mouth. How do we find the right people to potentially share our message, or the right people that would be interested in what we have to say? And usually we say, okay, well, look, maybe we'll put up a booth, we'll buy keyword advertising, but it's still difficult to find the right people who might be interested in our destination, who might be interested in our conference or event who hasn't come before. Well, what if we could use other people to do that targeting for us? Rather than us having to figure out or guess who might be interested, what if we could use other people to do that work for us? And that's exactly what word of mouth does. It goes through a social network, almost like a searchlight, to find the person or people that would find a piece of information most relevant. So this happened to me a couple years ago. I got a book in the mail, and academics often get free books. Publishers send them to us with the hopes that we'll sign them to our students, and they'll sell more copies in the process. But this time they didn't just send me one book. They sent me 2 copies of the exact same book. And so I'm sitting there looking at those 2 copies going, these look exactly the same. Why the second copy? And there was a note in the back of one of them that said, hey, Professor Berger, we think you'll like this book, but we also think you'll know someone else who will like this book. Pass the second copy on to them. And that's the first very simple hack I'm going to share with you guys this afternoon. How by turning our customers or our attendees into advocates can we get them to do the work for us? Right? Rather than us telling people this is a great event or us telling people it's a great destination, if we can get our attendees to do the work for us, people will be much more likely to trust and believe that information. It's much more targeted than it would be otherwise. Referrals that come in from existing business have 20% higher customer lifetime value. Why? Because someone found the other person in their social network that would be most interested. I didn't pass that book on to anyone. I passed it on to the other professor that I thought would find it most interesting or most relevant. Same with events, right? There's a big, academic conference in psychology this weekend that I often go to. But part of the reason I go is I'm listening to who else is going, did they like that event or not, and listening to what they said about it. Word of mouth is a powerful driver of behavior. One more fun example of this you can think of, Uber did a great job of this last holiday season. They sent out an email to many of their subscribers saying, hey, request free rides for your guests here. Having a holiday party, request free rides for your guests on Uber. Now, it's nice of them, but notice it's not just nice. It's very clever. They said, hey, existing Uber user, who in your social network might like what we have to offer? Pass this on to them. They got their existing users to do the work for them, turning them into advocates. So hopefully at this point, I convinced you of the value of word of mouth. Now let's talk a little about how to get it. And usually when we think about word of mouth and getting it, we think online. We think about Facebook, we think about Twitter, we think about LinkedIn, we think about online reviews. If you had to guess, though, from 100% all the way down to 0, what percent of word of mouth is online? From 100% all the way down to 0, what percent is on Facebook or Twitter or LinkedIn, blogs, online reviews? If you thought about that number, often people will guess something like 60%, 70%, maybe even higher. On average, maybe some people think 40, maybe 30, but on average, maybe about 50%. If you actually look at the data, only about 7% of word of mouth is online. Not 70, not 17, but 7. Much less than we might think. And that doesn't mean, by the way, that online isn't important. Online is certainly one of the very valuable channels to which word of mouth flows. But it's not the most important channel, right? When people think about what destinations to go to or what events to go to, they don't just look online to look at online reviews. They also talk to their friends. Right? Offline, my cousin is a great resource, knows about so many different travel destinations, always asking, where have you been, what do you recommend? It's a much more in-depth, rich conversation. We can get our questions answered from people that we really know. And so online is certainly a valuable tool, but offline is just as, if not more important. And second, by focusing so much on the technology, we forgot about something much more important, the psychology. Why are people talking and sharing in the first place? Because we can have tens of thousands of friends or followers or social connections, But if they don't share our stuff, it's not going to matter, right? If they don't pass our information on, it's not going to matter. There's a cartoon. It's a little morose, but I'll show it here. It said he had over 2,000 Facebook friends. I was expecting a bigger turnout. And I think lots of brands have been expecting a bigger turnout. There was this notion if we just accumulated friends and followers, we would be successful. But whether online or off, if people don't share a message, it's not going to matter. And so you might be wondering, okay, great, but how do I get people to share my message? Well, good news. It's not random, it's not luck, and it's not chance. There's a science behind why people talk and share. In fact, as I talk about in Contagious, 6 key factors, what I will call the steps that drive people to talk about and share all sorts of products and ideas and destination. STEPS is a framework that stands for social currency, triggers, emotion, public, practical value, and stories. Each of these is a research-based principle that across industries, across B2C and B2B, products, services, and ideas gets people to talk and share. It's not about talking about a product or service, it's about the psychology of why we share in the first place. I won't have time today. Unfortunately, we only have a couple minutes together to go through all 6, but I'll briefly touch on triggers, the second one in the framework. And then if we have a minute, I'll wrap up with stories. I'm, of course, happy to answer questions about any of the others. And there's also much more information in the book about each, and you can also find more information on my website as well. So let me skip social currency. It's a fun one. But in the interest of time, I'll talk about triggers. And to talk about triggers, I want to use an example that many of you have probably seen before, which is Geico's ad for Hump Day. Now, again, not the most exciting product or service in the world. It's insurance. If you haven't seen it, as you may know, Hump Day in the United States, Wednesday is called Hump Day. Why? Because it's the hump you have to get over to get to Friday. Monday's the beginning of the week. Friday's the end. You have to get over the Wednesday hump to get to Friday. So Geico builds a piece of content based on this. There's a camel, very annoying camel, walking around an office going, what day is it today? What day is it? What day is it? Everyone ignores the camel. It's very annoying. Finds this poor woman. Eventually, she goes, it's Hump Day. And the camel goes, woo, woo. And the ad goes, how happy are people who save money with Geico? Happier than a camel on Hump Day. Get it? Camels, humps, Hump Day. Okay. Hopefully you've either seen the ad or you get a sense of what I'm saying. Maybe you chuckled even. Now, this ad is funny. It's not that funny. It's funnier than I probably told it. It's funny when you see it on television. Yet even though it's not that funny, and even though they didn't spend that much money showing it, this is the second most shared ad of a couple of years ago. It's not a beer ad, not a car ad, but an insurance ad. Why did so many people share an ad if it's not that funny? Well, I'm a data guy. I dug a little deeper. And this is what the share data looks like for this ad over time. There's a spike in shares, and then it goes down. And then another spike, and then it goes down. And then another spike, and then it goes down. If you look closer, the spikes aren't random. They're actually 7 days apart. And if you get even close, you'll notice that they're every, Wednesday, or as it's colloquially known, Hump Day. Right? This piece of content is equally good or bad, depending on if you think it's funny or not, every day of the week. It's good or bad on Monday, it's good or bad on Tuesday, it's good or bad on Wednesday. But Wednesday rolls around, and it provides a ready reminder, what psychologists would call a trigger, to make people think about it and talk about it and share it. Because if something's top of mind, it's more likely to be tip of tongue. Right? Too often, as marketers, we think, do people like us? Do people like our destinations? Do people like our events? As long as they like us, they'll go. But if they're not thinking about us, they're not going to. Even if they like us, they're not thinking about us, they're not going to take action. Imagine you're a restaurant, right? There may be a restaurant in town that you love, whatever city you live in, but if you don't think about that restaurant when you're going out to eat, you'll never go there. 80% of purchase, 80% of choice is consideration. Are you thinking about it in the first place? In fact, some psychologists did a great study to test this. They changed the music that played in the grocery store on different days. So some days they played French music, and some days they played German music over the PA system in the grocery store. What'd they find? Well, on days they played French music, sales of French wine went up. And on days they played German music, same thing. Sales of German wine went up. And in fact, beer went up as well. Now, did the music change what wine people liked? No, they still like French wine or German wine or whatever they like. All it did was remind them to think of that wine in the first place, right? They still liked it, but they had to be reminded to actually purchase. Top of mind, tip of tongue. So let's spend just a couple minutes talking about this principle. Here's some more data. This is word of mouth about the brand Cheerios by time of day. So midnight, 2 a.m., 4 a.m. What you probably notice is most people talk about Cheerios when? For breakfast, right? Right around breakfast time. If you notice on the weekend, it's shifted to the right a little bit. Why? Well, because people wake up later. People talk about Cheerios when they're eating Cheerios. When someone comes back from one of your events, they're likely to talk about it a lot. But the challenge is they don't go to that event very often. So they talk about it right when they've come back, but the rest of the year is flat, right? This is exactly the problem with Disney World. Really engaging experience. No one wants to be in the office when someone comes back from Disney World, because all they do for the first couple days is tell you about how great it was. But they don't keep talking about it and sharing it because other things come up. And people don't go very often, so they don't keep sharing it. So what are other triggers we can use to remind people of us, even if they haven't been recently? Well, good news, there are other triggers. So if I said peanut butter and, what word might come to mind? Well, you might say jelly. Or if I said rum and, you might think of, well, Coke, right? Notice that peanut butter is almost like a little advertisement for jelly. It's almost like jelly should pay peanut butter like a kickback or like a referral fee, right? Because if peanut butter's around, jelly doesn't have to remind you it exists. Peanut butter does all the work for jelly, right? That's why Michelob used to have a slogan, weekends are made for Michelob. They wanted people to think about the beer when the weekend rolled around. Corona's done the same thing with the beach, right? I challenge you to go on a beach vacation and never think about Corona. It's pretty much impossible. You're lying there, you're in the sand, you're having a good time, you're reading a book, you get thirsty, you may think about a beer, right? Even if you don't like Corona, even if you don't like beer, I guarantee you'll think about it. Why? Because the beach is Corona's trigger. Very simply, the beach is Corona's peanut butter. And so at this point, what I would ask you to think about is, okay, what's your peanut butter? What's the thing in the environment that's going to remind people of your event, your destination, your place, even if you're not around? Because you can send them emails and you can call them on the phone and you can send out direct mail and all these other things, or you can link yourself to a peanut butter. And every time they see that peanut butter, they'll think of your jelly, right? Michelob did exactly this with Weekends Are Made for Michelob. Kit Kat did this a few years ago with Kit Kat and coffee, Break's best friend. So sales were down by about 30%. They wanted people to think about Kit Kat. So what did they do? They linked it to coffee. Coffee and Kit Kat and coffee, best friends forever, right? Now, if you're Kit Kat, why is coffee a really good trigger or a really good peanut butter to link yourself to? If you think about it, lots of people drink it, and it's really frequent, right? Frequency is really important. More frequent, more top of mind, more tip of tongue. Weekends Are Made for Michelob was originally holidays are made for Michelob, but they moved it to the weekend because the weekend is more frequent. But actually, my favorite example of this is reusable grocery bags. So many of you, think for a moment, which ones of you have reusable grocery bags somewhere in your home? Now, probably everyone, right? If I asked you to raise your hand, everyone would raise their hand. We all have reusable grocery bags somewhere in our home, right? Conferences have been giving to us for the past 5 years now. Everybody has reusable grocery bags. But think about it for a moment. How many of you use those bags every time you go to the store, right? And if I asked you to raise your hand if you use them when you go to the store, most of us would say no, right? 5, 6 of us maybe remember our bags every time we go to the store, but the rest of us don't. Right? And if you think about it for a moment, right, are we bad people? No, sure, you guys are better than the rest of us, but why do we forget our bags? Or alternatively, when do we remember? Well, if you think about it, when we remember when we get to the grocery store. We remember when we get to the checkout line, right? We're feeling really good about ourselves. We've done all our shopping. We found a short line. We got them things on sale. We got to the line. We go, oh, I forgot my bags, right? But you're not going to go home to get your bags to come back to the store. There's a peanut butter there, but it's too late. Right? It's like people thinking about your destination, your event, right, after it's already happened or after they've already planned something for that weekend, right? There's a peanut butter there, but it's too late. And so as we think about that idea of a peanut butter, we need to think about 4 key questions, right? First, who do we want to be triggered? Who's that target segment of people that we want to think about us? Is it the people coming to our events? Is it a separate set of people who are planning those events? Who are the individuals that we want to think about us? Maybe it's multiple segments. Then, secondly, when do we want them to think about us? When is the right time where we need to come to mind, right? If we're thinking about other conference planners, it may be an earlier place in the cycle. If we're thinking about attendees, it may be a later place in the cycle. When do we want them to think about us? When do we want them to be triggered? Then, what is around them at that time? And how can we create a link to that thing, right? How can we find a peanut butter, but at the right time or place? Top of mind, more likely to be tip of tongue, more likely to be purchased, more likely to take action, right? And I think this is a great tool. We used it, in fact, a few years ago to get Stanford students to eat 25% more fruits and vegetables. It's a great tool, right? We can all think about times where we think about something linked to something environment. We're trying to remember to take our vitamins. We leave the vitamin container out on the counter. Those things help us remember. We need to find our own trigger as well. Okay, I'm just about time, and I want to save time for questions, so I'll skip quickly through the rest. Emotion, the idea here is when we care, we share. Certain emotions, though, increase sharing more than others. It's not just positive emotions increase and negative decrease. Some positive emotions actually decrease sharing and some negative increase, but I'll let you read about it in the emotions chapter. Public, easier to see, easier to imitate, right? The easier it is for us to see other people going to an event or going to a destination, the more likely we are as well. Practical values, all about useful information. Just a simple example of this, if you sell something that's $20, you can make it $5 off or 25% off. Economically, those are the same. They're both, you pay $15 for it. People are much more motivated though when it's 25% off. At the same time, if it's $2,000, there it could be $500 off or 25% off. Again, economically the same. You pay $1,500 in both cases, but people are more motivated there by the dollar off amount. Numbers are not just numbers. How we frame those numbers matter. Something I call the rule of 100. You can read about that in the practical value chapter. And last but not least is stories. If you notice, as I was talking today, I told a lot of stories. Why? Because stories are the way we carry information. They're the currency of conversation. How can we build our events and our destinations, build stories around them to carry our message for the ride, right? People love telling stories. They don't want to seem like advertisements, but good stories carry information. So we need to think about building Trojan horse stories to carry our messages. One last slide for me. So we talked about the 6 key steps. I didn't get a chance to talk about social currency, but that's the better you look, the more likely you are to share. Triggers, we talked about finding our peanut butter. Emotion, when we care, we share. Public, easy to see, easy to imitate. Practical values, useful information. And last but not least, stories. Just one more thing, in case it's helpful, 2 key next steps when I work with clients, I often suggest. One is figure out what your kernel is. What is the thing or things you want people to say when they have a conversation about your event or your conference, your destination? If you had to script that conversation, what would they say? That's your kernel. And then use the steps around that. Right? Think about your social currency, think about your trigger, think about your emotion, all those different things, and use that to build word of mouth around what you're doing. And in case it's helpful, there's a free workbook on my website, just jonahberger.com/resources. You can download and you can work on with your team. Because again, it's not random, it's not luck, and it's not chance. There's a science behind why people talk and share. If we understand that science, we can craft contagious content, we can build more effective messages, and we get our ideas and destinations and conferences to catch on. Thank you very much. Fantastic. So I wanted to make sure to save time for questions. And sorry I hustled through that a little bit, but I wanted to save time for questions. So any questions that I can answer or help with? Let me see if I can put me back up. Great. Okay, good. I think you can see me. Good. Any questions I can answer about applying these ideas?
You skipped over the Maui Gym part of your presentation. What were you going to say about Maui Gym?
What was I going to say about Maui Gym? Sure, thank you. I'll use that as a minute to talk about stories. So what I was going to say about Maui Gym is we all wish that people would just say, hey, our conferences are great, or hey, this event was worth going to. But people don't want to seem like walking advertisements, right? Maui Gym has great customer service, but no one's just going to say, walking up to someone at a party, hey, Maui Gym has great customer service. But they will tell stories, right? No one wants to seem like a walking advertisement, but they're happy to tell stories. So I was talking to a friend of mine recently who loves Maui Gym, and they were mentioning how, oh man, you know, I had this pair of sunglasses, but unfortunately my dog tore them to shreds. Tore up the sunglasses to shreds. So I sent them back to the company because I couldn't tell which model they were. So I sent them back just hoping that they'd, you know, I wasn't hoping they'd pay for them, just that they'd tell me which model so I could order a new pair. And they sent me a free pair of sunglasses and a dog bone. And what I love about that story is it doesn't tell people that Maui Gym has great customer service. It shows people that Maui Gym has great customer service, right? Too often, we want to tell people things. We want to say, let me tell you how great our conference is. Let me list you the 6 reasons that you should go, the 7 things that you're going to learn while you're here. And certainly, that's important. But some of it is also thinking about how can we use stories to show rather than tell that information. Because really good stories carry that information along for the ride. That Maui Gym story shows you that they have great customer service. And so when I think about stories, I think a lot about what I call a Trojan horse story. Right? We can all think about Trojan horses, the Greeks, the Trojans. They build that big wooden horse. They hide their men inside. Good stories are like that. They're vessels or carriers of information. And so the question I would ask myself is, okay, what's the vessel or carrier of information for my conference or my event? Right? If it's about being innovative, okay, what's a story that shows how innovative our events are? If it's about fun, fantastic. What's a story that shows rather than tells how much fun our events is? What is a story that shows rather than tells how much learning goes on at a given event? Anyone can tell something, but we have to figure out how to show that thing and use that showing to carry our message along for the ride. Maybe one more question?
And I'm not exactly sure how to frame this, but you seem to know a lot about the events and destination industry. At least you tailored it nicely into your presentation. We saw Cheyenne up there. It looks fantastic. You go to another conference and you see another video like that. It looks amazing. Each one looks pretty amazing. I think the people who are here, destinations have a way of presenting themselves overall, in spite of their differentiation, quite similarly. How do you really differentiate them or make them stand out? Besides, stories are great, but some way to do that.
Yeah, so if we had more time, I would have showed you a video from a company called Blend Tech, and some of you may have seen this. They're called Will It Blend videos, and what they do is they drop an iPhone in a blender, and they actually blend an iPhone. And imagine watching them blend an iPhone. You're sitting there, they drop it in the blender, go very quickly, and eventually this iPhone gets torn to shreds. All that's left is like eye dust and a little bit of particles. And it shows you how powerful the blender is, right? It doesn't tell you it's a powerful blender. It shows you how powerful the blender was. And sales have gone up 700%. They did it for a $50 marketing budget. What's amazing about it to me, though, is they got people talking and sharing about blenders. But the neatest thing about that video, to answer your question, is it's not clear they're the only blender company that can do it. They just showed it in a very remarkable way. Right? While other blender companies might tell you how powerful it is, they figured out how to show people. And so I think you're right? There are many destinations that are beautiful. So many places in the United States and around the world that are beautiful. The question is, okay, great. There's not a lot of differentiation there. How can you create some differentiation? How can you show people rather than tell people what they're going to get out of your destination? I spend a lot of time in Philadelphia. You think about Philadelphia, what do you think of? You think of cheesesteaks, you think of Rocky, and maybe you think of the Phillies or the Eagles. That's what that destination is known for. Sure, it's got many more things than that, but that's kind of the Trojan horse that carries the message for Philly. And so I think the question is, thinking about your destinations, what's the thing it can be known for? Sure, beautiful scenery is fantastic, but what is the thing or two it can be known for to help it stand out? And or, even if it's not different, even if it's just great scenery, and lots of folks have great scenery, how can you show people that rather than tell people? How can you do it in a remarkable way and find that inner remarkability that carries your message along for the ride?
All right. Thank you for the questions and answering. It was a great presentation.
Fantastic. Thank you guys so much, and enjoy the rest of the event.
We want to make sure that each of you who are sitting at booths, our planners, you have compliments of the conference, this book, Contagious, that you have just heard about. So enjoy that. You'll find it at your table. And obviously some fascinating subject matter about how word of mouth really does positively and potentially negatively affect us all. So enjoy your book.